In the history of North and South Korea, there have been many dramatic, heart-stopping events, including assassination attempts targeting the top leaders of both sides. In 1968, a team of 31 North Korean commandos infiltrated South Korea with weapons. They made it all the way to the Blue House, the official residence of the South Korean president. Their mission was simple but terrifying: assassinate President Park Chung-hee. And this mission came shockingly close to succeeding, just one step away. So what made Kim Il-sung order such a seemingly insane operation? How did this man manage to infiltrate the Blue House and get so close to success? What happened to the 31 commandos after the mission failed? And how did South Korea retaliate? Hi everybody, I'm Tony. Today we're going to talk about the Blue House raid, an incident that stunned the entire world. First of all, this mission sounds absurd from the very beginning. Kim Il-sung decided to send a suicide squad of only 31 men to sneak into the Blue House and assassinate South Korean President Park Chung-hee. And Park Chung-hee, by the way, he is the father of Park Geun-hye, who is later become South Korea's 18th president. But think about it, can you really just go assassinate a South Korean president? How do you even send the soldiers across the border? And how do you even get them into the presidential residence? It sounds like something even movies wouldn't dare to write. But this actually happened. And what's even crazier, they almost pulled it off. But first of all, why all of a sudden did Kim Il-sung decide to assassinate South Korean President Park Chung-hee? Well, first, we need to understand the situation in the late 1960s. By then, Kim Il-sung had just reached the absolute peak of his power. He had already purged every faction inside the party. The Soviet faction, the Yan'an faction, they all gone. The military was fully under his control. And by this point, he had reached the peak of his power. That stage where dictators often slipped into a kind of delusional confidence, believing there's nothing they can't pull off. He believed that since he had completely unified North Korea internally, the time had finally come to unify the entire Korean peninsula. And the situation inside South Korea made him feel the timing was perfect. So what do I mean by that? President Park Chung-hee had originally been a young military officer. In 1961, he led a coup and established a military government. Although Park later ended military rule and ran in presidential election, and winning the presidency, but he used extremely hardline methods to eliminate rivals. His authoritarian rule sparked widespread dissatisfaction in South Korea, leading to student movements and anti-government uprisings. Meanwhile, America was stuck neck-deep in Vietnam. Seeing the Viet Cong bleeding the US badly and watching anti-war sentiment explode inside America, Kim Il-sung thought this was a golden opportunity. If he could eliminate Park Chung-hee, South Korea might fall into revolution. And once the South collapsed from within, North Korea troops could march in and finally unify the Korean peninsula. But there was also a very personal reason behind this. Park Chung-hee's economic reforms had made Kim Il-sung extremely uncomfortable. In the early years of Park's rule, North Korea's economy was actually stronger than South Korea's. But after Park took office, he launched a series of reforms that made South Korea's economy to take off. By 1968, which is the year of this incident, South Korea's economy had already surpassed the North. This hit Kim Il-sung's ego hard, so hard that he could barely tolerate it. Kim reportedly felt, if Park keeps rising like this, he will make me look weak, so I need to eliminate him. So pretty much all these factors combined led Kim Il-sung to make the decision. Since the decision was made, the first step was choosing the right people. But this selection process did not go smoothly, because the standards were pretty insane. First, you had to come from a perfect loyal revolutionary family background. Even though this was basically a suicide mission, in North Korea, if your background wasn't good enough, you didn't even qualify to be cannon fodder. Next, the physical requirements were brutal. You had to be able to survive 3 days with no food, walk 50 kilometers in a single night, stand in minus 20 degrees Celsius wearing nothing but shorts and not freeze to death, and stay awake for days at a time. I think I would be fine with staying awake for days, cause if I don't take sleeping pills, I can go days without sleep. But I would say 99% American would fail at the very first 3 days with no food part. But for North Koreans, honestly, probably 99% would pass, because anyone who couldn't do that had already starved to death. Anyway, you got the idea. They wanted people with extreme physical endurance and unbelievable willpower. And that still wasn't enough. You also had to be sharp and intelligent. Why? Because you had to imitate South Korean. You can't be asking for directions, and the moment you open your mouth, everyone instantly knows you are North Korean soldiers who slipped across the border. And since they planned to disguise the team as South Korean troops, the operatives also had to memorize South Korean military terminology. So after a strict screening and filtering process, they finally selected 31 men. Most of them are officers. I mean, it makes sense, since officers generally had a strong overall quality than regular soldiers. And then the real training began. Their training was divided into two parts. The very first part includes all the standard military tasks: shooting, hand-to-hand combat, explosives, and the wilderness survival. Pretty standard stuff. But the second part was far more secretive. They were taken to a hidden location in Wonsong, North Korea, where a newly built structure stood. This building was called Target 1, and it was a full-scale 1-to-1 replica of South Korea's presidential residence, the Blue House. Everything was the same, from the exterior to the internal layout. And only at this point were the 31 men finally told their mission. They were going to assassinate President Park Chung-hee. They then spent 12 days inside this replica undergoing intensive special training, memorizing every room, every route, every guard post, and the location of key officials, especially Park Chung-hee's office. Before departure, North Korea equipped each of them with PPS-43 submachine gun, a simple, reliable Soviet-made weapon that was perfect for close-quarter combat. High fire rate, easy to handle, and lightweight. They also received a Tokarev pistol, chosen specifically because it used the same ammunition as the PPS-43. This would help reducing the number of different bullets they needed to carry. In addition, each man received 16 grenades, a tactical knife, and 320 rounds of ammunition. This was considered top-tier equipment in the North Korean military at the time. But the problem is, how exactly were they planning to assassinate the president? And how were North Korean soldiers supposed to get to Seoul? By working there? Yes, they were literally going to work there. And here's the plan. On the night of January 16, 1968, the team would secretly cross into South Korea through a hidden tunnel in Yongsan, near the Yellow Sea on the North Korean side of the border. Separating the two countries, there was a river called the Imjin River. Once they crossed that river, Seoul was only 34 kilometers away. Because it was the dead of winter, the river was frozen solid. The team planned to walk across the ice at night and sleep through the border. They chose this spot for a reason. The opposite bank was guarded by the US forces, and the US military believed there was no way any North Korean soldiers would attempt to break through this area. So the defenses were extremely relaxed, especially at night. And the team didn't plan to attack the moment they came ashore. They would change into South Korean military uniforms they had prepared beforehand, and pretend to be members of South Korea's counterintelligence unit. By doing this, even if they were questioned, they could still talk their way through. After crossing the border, they would rest briefly on the outskirts of Seoul, and then make their way into the city. Once they reached the presidential district, they would use their disguises to get inside the Blue House and launch the attack. After completing the mission, the team planned to seize a military vehicle parked at the Blue House, blare the siren, and escape north. If escape became impossible, they would just split up and flee using the same route they used to infiltrate South Korea. If we put it nicely, this plan was incredibly bold. But if we're being honest, this plan was nothing but wishful thinking. So how did a plan with this many holes get so close to succeeding? On the night of the operation, the temperature dropped to -10 degrees Celsius. When they entered the frozen Imjin River through the secret tunnel, they found the entire river covered in thick fog. The US troops guarding this area couldn't see a thing. So the team crossed the ice easily and slipped into South Korean territory. They immediately changed into the South Korean uniforms. These uniforms were modeled after real South Korean military gear, meaning they looked almost distinguishable from the real thing. But even so, they didn't dare walk around in broad daylight. During the day, they hid in the forest and slept. They marched only during the nighttime. It took them about 3 days to reach Dakpung Mountain on the outskirts of Seoul. From there, the Blue House was only a few miles away. They rested a little bit, then split into 6 small teams, and started descending, ready to head towards the Blue House and begin the assassination. Unexpectedly, everything went unbelievably smooth after they came down the mountain. Even when South Korean police saw them on the streets, they didn't stop them or question them, probably because the disguise were pretty convincing. And so, the commandos marched straight through the city, bold as ever, getting closer and closer to the presidential residence. One of the 6-man's team was the first to reach the outer perimeter of the Blue House. But here, a South Korean police officer spotted them. Because this area was so close to the presidential residence, the guards were extremely alert. The officer felt something was off. 6 men walking around in military uniform at that hour looked very suspicious. So he approached them and asked why they were wandering near the Blue House in uniform. And a quick note here. President Park Chung-hee came to power through a military coup. So while he never imagined North Korean commandos would try to assassinate him, he was constantly worried that his own soldier might do exactly what he once did, stage a coup and overthrow him. So the guards around the Blue House were especially wary of anyone in a South Korean military uniform. The North Korean team claimed they were members of South Korea's counterintelligence unit, on their way to report urgent information at the Blue House. The officer wanted to ask more detailed questions, but at that moment, the officer suddenly noticed something wrong. They were all wearing black rubber shoes. Right away, he knew something was off. South Korean soldiers were never issued rubber shoes. They were US-style military boots. But the North Korean soldiers did commonly wear black rubber shoes. Realizing something was horribly wrong, the officer prepared to alert nearby police for backup. But just then, a bus pulled up beside them. The commando thought they had been completely exposed and assumed the bus was full of South Korean soldiers sent to capture them. So they immediately drew their pistol and shot the police officer. They then threw a grenade at the bus, trying to create chaos and use the confusion to fight their way into the Blue House. But the South Korean military police nearby, after hearing the noise, reacted quickly. After arriving, a firefight broke out between them and the six-man team. The problem was the South Korean guards were armed with M1 carbines, a World War II-era US weapon. It is designed for self-defense, not offensive combat. Their firepower was weak, so a large number of South Korean guards were actually suppressed by just 6 North Korean commandos. Fortunately, inside the Blue House grounds was a detachment from South Korea's 121st Infantry Division. They rushed over to support. With their arrival, South Korean forces numbered over 100, and they finally managed to kill 5 of the 6 men. One was captured, but before he could be taken away, he detonated a grenade and killed himself. This incident reinforced South Korea's belief that there must be many more North Korean agents nearby. And they were right. The purpose of this 6-man team was simply to create chaos at the gate to cover the real assassination squad trying to slip into the Blue House. Sure enough, near a bus stop not far from the Blue House, there were 6 North Korean commandos hiding. After hearing gunfire, they started the operation. This assassination squad managed to kill the guard at the side gate and push their way into the outer Blue House grounds. If you have ever seen a photo of the Blue House, you would know there is only a big lawn between the main street and the residence. At this point, the North Korean commandos were only about 100 meters from the Blue House itself. But Park Chung-hee was a very cautious man. He had positioned 2 tanks and 6 armored vehicles inside the presidential compound. I can imagine the North Korean commando must have been stunned when they saw tanks sitting inside the Blue House. This was far beyond anything they had planned for. Against the tanks and armored vehicles, their firepower collapsed instantly. In the end, all 6 members of the assassination team were killed in the firefight. Because the clash took place on one of the Seoul's busiest streets, many civilians were caught in the crossfire, resulting in heavy casualties. After several hours of fighting, South Korea killed 28 North Korean agents and captured 1 alive. South Korea also suffered heavy losses: 88 civilians killed, 22 soldiers killed, 2 police officers killed, and even 2 US soldiers got killed. Another 47 South Korean soldiers were wounded, along with 5 police officers and 16 American soldiers. All of this really shows just how dangerous this North Korean Special Operation Unit was. Now you might be wondering, why were there only 12 North Korean commandos fighting at the Blue House? Weren't there supposed to be 31 of them? According to the only captured member, kimilsung, there were indeed 31 men in total. They had split into 6 teams, each assigned to different targets, including the South Korean presidential residence, the US Embassy in Seoul, the headquarters of the US 8th Army. That explains why there were American casualties as well. Another team was supposed to attack a prison holding captured North Korean agents to rescue their comrades. So in other words, only 12 men were actually sent to attack the Blue House. If all 31 had reached the president's residence, South Korean forces might not have been able to stop them in time. And who knows, the operation might actually have succeeded. But this also showed a major flaw in North Korea's planning. They tried to accomplish too many objectives in a single mission. By spreading their forces thin, they failed to concentrate their strength on the most important target. Through Kim Shin-jo's interrogation, South Korea learned 2 more commandos were still on the run. South Korean military and the police launched a massive 2-week manhunt, involving tens of thousands of soldiers and police officers. One of the fugitives were eventually found and killed, but the other one escaped. And this guy, despite being shot in the abdomen, managed to push his intestines back into his body with his own hands, press them down with a plastic bowl, break through multiple layers of South Korean defenses, and run 40 kilometers through the minefields and the barbed wire of the DMZ to return to North Korea. Think about that. Running 40 kilometers with your intestines spilling out, the sheer of willpower is unimaginable. He later returned to North Korea as a national hero, and eventually became Vice Minister of the People's Armed Force, and his name was Park Jae-kyung. But the fate of the captured commando Kim Sung-jo was completely different. After spending several years in custody, Kim Sung-jo was released. The government granted him South Korean citizenship, but secretly kept him under surveillance. He knew he could never return to North Korea. After the news broke out that he was still alive, his family back in the north suffered terrible consequences, either executed or sent to labor camps. He regretted not dying during the mission, and even attempted suicide multiple times. Later, with the help of his South Korean wife, he converted to Christianity and eventually became a pastor. It's incredible when you think about it. He had once been one of North Korea's most loyal communist soldiers. If he hadn't been absolutely loyal, he never would have been selected for this mission. And yet, he ended up spending his life as a Christian pastor. What's even more interesting is that the man who ran back to North Korea with his intestines in his hands became a general, and even visited Seoul years later, during the Kim Dae-jung administration. Same mission, two survivors. One became a pastor, one became a general. History is full of stories you couldn't make up. But the craziest part, this story isn't over. This is only the first half. Park Chung-hee didn't take this assassination attempt lightly. He was furious. He ordered the creation of a special unit specifically tasked with assassinating Kim Il-sung. And just like North Korea, he wanted the team to have 31 men. The South Korean Air Force handled recruitment, while the US military trained them. The plan was to fly these 31 men over Pyongyang in a balloon, parachute down near the leadership's compound, and carry out a decapitation mission against Kim Il-sung. This man was secretly transported to a small island for brutal, year-long training. But what happened next was something no one expected. The entire operation turned into a tragedy, a full-scale disaster that shocked the entire nation. So what really happened? In our next episode, we'll talk about South Korea's revenge plan, the Seomi Island incident. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, hype, and subscribe. With that, I will see you in the next one.